Joe's Inner Child Podcast.
Rivers of London. Now, I know that the first book originally came out a decade ago for Rivers of London.
And it's called Midnight Riot in America.
Okay. Can you tell me when you initially started the process of like writing and developing the series? I know that it initially came out in 2011, but how long were you working on it before then?
I've been thinking about this because of the 10th anniversary, and I looked it up, and I started about 2009. Serious writing started in 2009. It was finished sort of towards the end of 2009, and then the initial editorial, and then finding an agent, and then finding a publisher took up the beginning part of 2010. And then for some reason, publishers hate to release a book anytime soon. They like to have it for at least a year before they put it out. And then it came out January 2012, which is, well, my is a graveyard slot, but hey, what are you going to do?
So when when the first book had initially come out, I know you have a whole series. Did you already have it planned to continue to bring out other installments?
I'm an experienced writer, so I knew that they'd prefer it if you have like at least some idea of what the next. They like to get 3-book contracts, and publishers generally like a 3-book, or British publishers. I don't know about American publishers, and they like a series because, you know, especially in science fiction, fantasy, and crime, these, you know, of which this book is all 3. So they like to have a series. It's not essential, but they do like to have a series, and you know, just. I was desperate, so I made sure it was a series, basically. So I had like one of those paragraphs that says, like, then he goes to Soho and it's exciting, you know, with really no idea what was going to happen next. And then the third one was even more vague, and I don't think actually in any way resembles the actual book that ended up coming out as third. But I think they just want you to show willing. You know, it's not like TV where you actually have to have like outlines ready to go. When you go into the office, you have to have outlines and everything, you know, character development arcs and that sort of thing. Publishing is much less kind of stressful that way. I'm going to put you on different kind of view because, yeah, that's better. Because I'm distracted by myself. Going, oh my god! It's vanity, all is vanity. So. What was I talking about?
You were talking about how your plan for the 3 books.
Yes, I've never had a plan. Even to this day, I never have a plan as to, you know, some of the characters' arcs are kind of, you know, they just suggest themselves. So, and some of them surprise you, and some of them want to go one way, and you want them to go the other way, and they end up going the other way. Stories tend to take on a momentum once you've written 8 books. The stories begin to take on their own momentum. People's personalities tend to drive that. I mean, plot is really just character in motion, and so therefore, once you have characters who are fairly well established, then they will, to a certain extent, decide what the plot is going to be. You know, of course, you have external events and you can influence them, but they kind of dictate how they react to events. And also because this was more like a crime series than a fantasy series, that it was, you know, in detective series, you have a detective and then you have a murder, and then the next book, another murder, and next book, another murder. It's much less like the Song of Ice and Fire, where you're definitely moving to something. It's a lot more relaxed, which is good because I didn't have any idea where it was going. So that's just as well, really.
So when you initially had started it, did you have plans to blend all of those elements together with the crime and the fantasy, sci-fi stuff? Did you plan on doing all those elements together, or did you start it as kind of one story and then find that it worked better when you added other things to it?
No, it was always what I think of as a fantasy police procedural. I mean, I like police procedurals, and I like fantasy, and I like science fiction. And I couldn't really decide what I wanted to write. I mean, I didn't really have a good fantasy idea or a good science fiction idea that I thought was particularly different from what everyone else was doing, and I didn't have a crime idea that was like distinctive enough. And then in about 2000. Well, I mean, I've been developing this idea. Like, I initially had this idea as a television idea back in the early 2000s. So back in 2001. And some of the police procedural elements came from 1995, 1996. But you as a writer, you never, if you don't use it, you never throw an idea away that you might be able to pull in and kind of throw into the mixer at the right point. I always think of my writing style as being like a gumbo. I kind of like have this big pot, and I just keep throwing in ingredients in the hope that it will taste good at some point. If I
love that. I love that metaphor. Yeah, I feel like that's how I work too. But you initially wrote for television before doing all this. I know that you had done stuff on Doctor Who and other things as well. So was that pretty much your plan? Were you hoping to continue in television and then decided that this medium worked better for you?
No, what happened was my career in television ended, and it's the thing about being a freelance writer is no one tells you. So it's not like you get a note saying, "Hello, your career in television. Please find another career." So you just find yourself getting broker and broker. You're still doing loads of meetings. You're still going to meetings, and you're still having development conferences, and people are still saying, "Yeah, we'll get together and talk about this." It's just that after about a year, you realize you haven't been paid, and you're going bankrupt. So that happened, and I kind of flailed around for a bit, and I had to get a job, which is like I hate work personally. I really just hate work. Any kind of work, any kind of involving physical exercise or even just being told what to do day by day it's just I'm really bad at it, always have been. So I had to go get a job, which you can imagine was like the last resort. So I ended up working in Waterstones because I figured I have no other skills really apart from writing, which is not a very translatable kind of, and not even like the kind of writing where you can go off and write articles for magazines or copy for no, I can write fiction. That's basically, that's what I've got. That's all I've got. So I ended up in a bookshop, and I'd been there for about a year and a half, and I was shelving my sections, which I ran the crime and the science fiction sections. And I was looking at the shelves, and I was shelving people I'd never heard of. And I realized that these people had all been published in the last year. There were new debut authors who'd all been published. And I thought, oh my God, it must be really easy to go to. I always feel this just sounds really arrogant. It must be really easy to be a published author and, be a prose author. And I have written prose before. I've written tie-ins for things like Doctor Who, but I've never written a sort of non-tie-in prose. So I knew I could write prose. It's just like, to me, it seemed to take a long time compared to writing a script, which is much faster, a more immediate kind of rush. So I thought, oh great, I'll write a novel. And then I thought, well, what can I write? And this idea that I'd been kicking around as a television idea, and some other ideas that I've been kicking around just because, when you must do this, you just kick ideas around, you watch something and you think, well, what if that guy was green or something, and they just sit in the back of your brain, like, la, 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 and then I just put them all together, and I kind of sort of put out a kind of, I don't know, tender in my head for a character. And Peter Grant turned up, and I wrote essentially what is the first 2-3 pages of Rivers of London, or Midnight Riot as it's known in America. And I read it and I thought, fuck me, this will sell, right? Because the voice, you see, in the end, right, with prose, you tend to buy the voice, right? You can forgive plot holes and implausibilities and kind of like, I don't know, somebody wouldn't do that. But if the voice works, you just want to spend time with that voice, kind of like, that's why first person is so seductive as a thing, oh, I like this person, so I got that way. So when I say this will sell, I mean, it will sell to an agent, it will sell to a publisher. You can't second guess the general public. They know what they like or they don't like, and so therefore they will do whatever they like accordingly. So I had his voice. I just went, and then it was just a question. It was like getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and writing the bloody thing, which seemed to take a long time, and voila. And then it sold, and it was much more successful than everyone thought it, including my agent and my publishers. We were, oh my God, no, quick, print some more. And then, you know, and you could tell because suddenly my publisher was being much nicer to me and buying me nicer lunches. You know, I was going up what I think was the lunch ladder, where you start off with a kind of like fairly standard lunch, and then they take stuff into more and more fancy restaurants. And think, aha, I must be going up in the world.
So back when you first started, was there? Well, you said it's not called Rivers of London in the U.S. You said it's called
Midnight
Midnight Riot. So I want
Rivers of London just to confuse people because
I the copy I got says Rivers of London because I think I work with the UK agent, but I wanted to know if you had concept art done when you were initially working on this, even though you didn't.
I have 2 pennies to rub together. There's no concept art.
So when did
concept art? No, you don't. I mean, one of the advantages of prose is you don't need concept art. It's all written down. So you know. No, I didn't have anything like concept art. I mean, most of it's set in London. Most of it's recognizably set in London, so I didn't need art of what it looked like. I just needed to go. I mean, a lot of it's set within kind of like half an hour's walk of where I was working. That's why it's all around Covent Garden and Russell Square and places like that. Places I knew, places I could write with confidence. You know, without having to do, because I like to go and look at places when I'm writing about them. I like to go and have a look. And nowadays, you see, I can afford to get on a train and go places and have a look around. And then if I want to do it again, I can afford to go back and have a look. But in those days, you know, I was stuck. I was still working full time for the first 2 books, really, and you saw it was all written basically within kind of walking distance of my work, most of the locations. And for that, you didn't need concept art. You just went and look.
So when did your art? I know that there's art now. When did the art process initially begin?
Well, the art process began with the comics, I suppose. So I went to the comic people and I went to Titan and I said, I got an IP, let me write a comic, because I always wanted to write a comic, because it's like, you know, doesn't everyone deep down want to write a comic? And I had my friend Andrew, who had actually written comics before, so I'll take him along because they'll trust him not to fuck it up. And we went to the comics, and it was like, yay, comics, and they said yes, and that's when you start having to actually think about what people are wearing a lot more, and like, because the art has, and then you have to make it so that it's art that the artist can draw, because there's no point asking the artist to draw something they can't draw. So and the next thing you know, everything kind of gets, that's when the art, and then as the books picked up momentum, the possibility of merch started to come up. And so therefore then you make a decision. Do you control your own merch, or does somebody else control your merch? If I'd had a TV series, you see, that would have just been all swept up by the broadcaster, and they would have run off with the merch rights, because they're extremely greedy that way. But I didn't happen with me, so I'm kind of trying to find ways of producing artwork to a high standard that I can then sell to people. And we're in its early days. And then look at people do fan art, which is nice. A lot of people do for some very nice fan art.
So I know in the early 2000s you would kind of envision it as a TV series, but now that, a couple decades later, now that you have this big, comic deluxe version coming out, do you think that there could be a adaptation on screen in the future?
Well,
or is that something you're avoiding because of the merch?
No, no, God, no. I'm not George Lucas. I don't have no desire to have my stuff on a lunchbox. Although I wouldn't mind his money. I'm perfectly happy to have his money. If you're out there, Lucas, and you want to give some money to someone, TV series is great. I would like a TV series, but it's a very expensive show. It's a very expensive show. Just filming in central London is hideously expensive. And the part of it was when I was writing, I was going, I'm writing prose. I don't have to worry about budget. So I threw in all these things that you just would avoid like the plague if you were writing a series set in London. It's a series like it. So there's loads of central London locations. There's some things Covent Garden blows up. There's a riot in Bow Street. These are all things that just like make it almost unfilmable without a really big budget. Just the Jaguars, the Mark II, the Mark II Jaguars are just really expensive. So because they're vintage cars, and when you're doing a TV series, you need at least 4 cars because you need like a couple of backups. You need a stunt car, and you need a sort of what they call the hero car, which is the car that looks really good in close up. And then you've got to, just that would be hugely expensive. And so the chance of it being made the more expensive a TV show is, the chance of it being made is smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, because then you're getting probably involved in you're talking kind of Netflix or Amazon or someone with really deep pockets, and they like what they like, and I'm a control freak. So it's unlike they might come to me at some point and go, yes, you can have all this money and go off and do what you want, and that would be great, but it's not the way to bet. So the chances of a TV series, it's a good IP, it's a good TV series, a good product to turn into a TV series. It's got lots of potential, but it is expensive, and I'm not just going to give it away for free. I mean, if Steven Spielberg backs up a truckload of money, right? Literally drops like 2 million quid on my front lawn, I'm not going to say no. But for a standard fees, they're going to have to. I have to go with the package, and so therefore, I'm not saying it won't happen, and I'm not saying that people aren't working towards it happening. But it's not an easy thing to sort of like do. It's not an easy thing to do. So it may or may, people. It's always amazing to me that anything gets made in television, actually, because it's so involved and complex and technically difficult that I'm not really going, oh no, my thing has not been made into TV. It's like there's no right to be turned into a TV series.
So when you do you have anything else post Rivers of London that you're working on now, or is this pretty much still your focus?
Rivers of London. Rivers of London is still my focus. I like writing it, and so therefore I have, I'm not getting bored with it yet. So, and people are still buying it. I'm not going to make the Arthur Conan Doyle mistake of throwing Peter off a cliff, just because I want to get rid of him and then having to bring him back. Oh no, he's come back. I deliberately made him much younger than me so that I would avoid that problem you have if you have a character growing up in the real world, right? They have to retire at 55. That's mandatory retirement age for the police in this country. So, Peter would be out, and so therefore, and then I'd have to write that tricky book. I'd ever have to find a successor. I'd write that tricky book where he retires and then comes back in some other capacity. And I thought, I'll just make him young. By the time he hits mandatory retirement age, I'll be dead. It won't be a problem, right? So, and I like writing him. He still comes up with mad things. He still kind of like tiptoes, talks to me in my sleep, and he goes, "Oh, I could do this, and this would be fun." So, that hasn't stopped. And also, other characters have grown up around him that I'm becoming very fond of, like Abigail, for whom there's been a novella. So, if I want to, I can do spin-offs. I do have a couple of other projects. I'm unsurprisingly, I have a space opera that I turn to every so often, and I have a fantasy novel, a sort of steampunky fantasy novel that I turn to every so, when I need a distraction, or I also because I really, really just like spaceships, and I want to. It's spaceships, you don't have it. So sometimes I just have to write something with spaceships, and I have to write something with swords in it because I just have to. Something has to give, and I have to go off and do that. But so at some point, one of those will get finished, and then I will try and sell it. So
those are itches that you're scratching for yourself. But I
believe in writing the book that you want to write. Okay, I'm in a very comfortable position now. I don't have to sell it to television to sustain myself. I don't have to write anything else ever again, probably, if I was careful with my money, to live quite a good life for the rest of my life, barring, leg losses or something like that. But I do want to write. I like to write. I don't want to retire. And I like to write there are some things I would like. I'm going to write whether they tell me to or not. But I'm a very slow writer, which is why the stuff takes ages. I'm not like you think J.R.R. Martin's a slow writer. I'm a much more slower writer than J.R.R. Martin. It's just that he writes much longer books.
That's a really good point. I never really thought about that, the length of the books and how long it takes versus other things, because it takes him forever, but they are really long. Really.
Yeah, I mean, one of his books is about 5 times as long as one of my books. So it takes me about, just under a year to write one book. So I'm not really that shocked by it taking him 5 years to write a book or something,
So this new edition where it's got the art and the full story, together, is this how long was this in plans for this?
Are we talking about the comic deluxe edition or the first novel?
The comic deluxe.
Yeah, the comic deluxe edition. I think Titan have wanted to do it for a while. They like to do these kinds of spin-offs with, and so they've been talking about it, like doing guest script, using the original photographs, showing the development of the story. And I know Andrew was very keen because he thinks our scripts are really good. Whereas, I mean, the thing about comic scripts is you don't write them for anyone else to read except for the artist, and so they're a little bit kind of like, give me a big fish. You know how I like fish, and I think just they thought, it's the anniversary of the actual overall anniversary of the Rivers of London. Let's do Bodywork as a deluxe, because people will then be able to read the script. So, and I think it's interesting because the comics were deliberately written not to be adaptations of the books. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but the comics are not adaptations of the novels. They're completely separate stories because I wanted to take advantage of the fact that comics are a completely different medium. And so therefore they have advantages and disadvantages when you're writing. I wanted to take advantage of the comic book medium rather than trying to make the prose books fit into the format of a comic. I thought it'd be much more fun to get our characters and put them into the medium of comics, which is a completely different medium. So you still have all your fun things where you have all the characters that you get to see what they look like and the locations and everything, but you're not kind of tied down to trying to cram after all, 96,000 word novel does not fit into 5 issues. It just doesn't, right? And I've read a lot of comic book adaptations, and they always have to chop big chunks out of it in order to make it work. Whereas if you just sit down and go, I'm going to write 4 or 5 issues of a story set in this world, you can have something that's much more organically comic-y and much more kind of properly comic book, because comic book is a medium and an art form in its own right. And so therefore it's almost insulting to kind of just go, I will adapt my novel into it. It's much more kind of like interesting and kind of respectful to actually treat it as its own thing and write stories for it, rather than to try and stick your stories, cram your stories into a different format.
You had mentioned with like the voice and the voice that you used to tell the story in the novels. Do you feel like you have that same voice with the graphic novel, or that you had to find a different voice, or do you just kind of let the images take over that part of kind of what you were talking about before?
In comic books, you have to let the images take over, because what's the point of doing a comic if it's not a visual thing? But you kind of have you have a flavor of the voice, because in the comics we can follow other characters, and so therefore they don't necessarily have the same voice, the same syntax as Peter when we have other characters on screen. We have other characters and we have their thought process. I mean, it's the box. It's the box at the top. It used to be little thought bubbles, but now it's the box at the top where you can put people's thoughts. So you can have that kind of dry Peter narration or ironic counterpoint narration, but you can also have other people's dry, ironic counterpoint narration, or So I think to feel we've captured the flavor of the novels in the comic, but we haven't tried to impose Peter's voice on the comics. We've utilized it where it seemed appropriate, where we thought it would work.
So what is there anything else specifically about the graphic novel that we haven't touched on that you kind of want to mention, or even just the books in general?
No, I mean, I never know what people want to know. I just write them. I just write the novels. I get on with it.
Well,
I'm grateful everyone's ready to hand out money for them. I just hope, I've got that whole thing where you go, I write these novels and I live in fear of people not buying them. So basically, but I'm enjoying them still, and I'm hoping that while I'm enjoying them, other people are enjoying them.
well, it seems like it's pretty successful. So I want to congratulate you on that. Is there any, I don't know if you use social media, anything that you want like readers to try to reach out to you on, to ask you questions or to find your work?
I mean, there are usually things like I get sent out to do things, and in these days, in days of COVID, a lot of these are now even when we're going back to actually doing live events, we'll probably go back to doing live events that are also hybrid events, so that we'll do things on Zoom, but we will have a live. I miss people. I never thought I'd say that. I'm not a very extroverted person, but I miss people. I miss talking to a live audience. So I've said, let's do some hybrid events. Then we can have all the advantages that we had when people could, all over the world, could just log in and ask questions, and I can have a live audience and sign some books, which is, and also sell some books. I might add, live events are very good for selling books. People, you can come in if you buy a book. No, have to buy a book.
Well, do you have any, do you have plans for once COVID is kind of calmed down to set stuff up like that, or is that something that you?
Yeah, I mean, people are. Sorry, it's a.
That's okay.
Very strange looking helicopter.
I could hear it. I was like, I don't know what's going on there.
I thought it was a Chinook. It's like sometimes Chinooks fly over my house because they practice landing over there. This is also practicing landing. There's like an emergency landing spot in the park near my house, and every so often you'll be sitting there and like a Chinook will just drop out of the sky, and go, no, and they're so loud. But that was something else entirely I haven't seen before, especially when like the American president's over, and suddenly thousands of helicopters go. Vroom, vroom, vroom.
I can imagine. I can only imagine. So that mostly wraps up what I have to ask then. I think you said there's not really too much else that you wanted to mention. Is there anything else that you wanted me to include?
Events. I mean, we'll be doing hybrid events. I have a Twitter account and a Facebook page that the Facebook page is mainly what I use to communicate, what's coming next. I'm not very good at Facebook. I don't friend people very often, so it's like I don't really use Facebook for the purpose that it's supposed to be. So
Same.
Even when I'm watching, following other groups, I tend not to kind of interact. I'm an introvert. I don't. If I wanted to meet people, I'd go out and meet people. It's like, but I also have Twitter, which I'm much more au fait with because it's much more kind of ephemeral. I'm on Twitter, but Facebook page. I also have, if you go to my website, which is benaaronovitch.com, I believe, you will find there is a sign up for a newsletter. So if you want to get like up-to-date information on what I'm doing, I promise not to spam you with millions of newsletters. It's very kind of like, we only try and do it when there's like something worth saying, or I'll put a little tiny storylet in or something to make it worthwhile getting it, because I hate newsletters that are just kind of like empty of content. So
well, I'll definitely check that out, and I'll add that in with the articles so that anybody else who wants to be bothered by you can get those too.
But that will also have information on where to get merch and all that kind of other stuff. All goes on to that, and I put it on the Facebook page and stuff. Other than that, I'm not very gregarious because I'm a very slow writer, you see. So I actually have to spend most of my time writing novels. And if I am seen on social media, like all the people around me goes, "Get off social media, start writing, you lazy git." And it's like, oh. Right. And they're like, "No, we're not paying you to go on social media."
I'm gonna start telling myself that just so I can give myself a kick in the ass. Get off social media, go right.
I'm quite lucky. I'm not very good at social media, to be honest. I'm not. I look at like Instagram and I go, "What is this?" And I don't even know if my son patiently explained TikTok to me once, and I don't really. And Pinterest. What the fuck is Pinterest?
Yeah, I don't use either of those, so I feel you 100%.
No, I'm like, I haven't tried to be down with the kids. I only get down with the kids when I'm writing Abigail. I have to. So.
Literary Joe's Inner Child Podcast.